Duško from Montenegro. There's a microphone in the middle and one at the front, so we can use a microphone. Just while the speakers are coming up, I'll read the first couple of questions. We have quiet, please. The first question is from Chris Rayburn. Bearing in mind that there have been no communist regimes that have survived more than 30 years, why should I believe that communism has a real chance of becoming reality? The second is from Alice Randenson from Communism for Dummies magazine. This is directed to Slavoj. Slavoj, do you do drugs? What is your attitude to drugs? Do you do drugs? What is your attitude to drugs? What would be the role of drugs in a communist society? The question is from Pauline Wheatbowen from Unison. Would you say that communism is not only possible, but inevitable? Okay, so the first speaker is Basan and then Duško. You've got 3 minutes to speak.
The first thing that hit me, the issue of communizing and the appropriation of spaces and all of these things. Honestly, I only see it happening in places where it can happen. In places, for example, in the Middle East, it's impossible. You'll have tanks in a few minutes in front of you. What do you do with that? This is where you have to organize resistance. And when you look at the issue of resistance and how you deal with all of these things, one of the trials that happened, for example, in the 2002 and 2003 in Lebanon, some people decided to start up a commune, and if they want to break totally with capital, one question was asked to them in a meeting and nobody answered. How do you get in a bus from one place to another? Who creates the bus? Who drives the bus? Who organizes the process of transportation? Who organizes all of these things that actually make us live? Talking about spaces and appropriation of different communization spaces, it's for me, it's more of a romantic luxury than actually, because the real thing is how do you organize the production process, which we all survive on. We cannot survive without organizing how we live on a daily basis. And another thing is, one park does not. It brings hope because they won a battle. They did not create communism because communism is on the picket line, is in demonstrations, is when you go into fight with the police, it's all of these things. When all of society is free, then we can talk about communism. It doesn't start in bits and pieces. It starts when the struggle hit a peak, and then you start seeing the future because you start seeing the potential of the population in organizing itself in its totality, not in bits and pieces, because organizing tens of people or hundreds of people is not enough. That's what happened, for example, in 2006 when the Israeli attack. Beirut was organized by a different grassroots group. It was not organized by the state. The state did not exist. 1 week after, the state intervened in every single locality, and then they banned aid from different spaces. What do you do in these spaces? You cannot even keep the space and leave the other spaces being attacked by the state. You have to go there and fight them as well. This is how you spread it. And you don't spread it by spaces, you spread it by struggle. Thank you.
So next speaker is Duško, and he'll be followed by Rachel Eggerell from Malta Forest.
Hello to everyone. I'm British from Montenegro. I used to live here for 21 years, and I arrived in 1987 and moved back to 2008 to Montenegro. And this spring I was chosen Vice President of Communist Party Montenegro. This party used to be leading party in all Yugoslavia, but with disintegration Yugoslavia, counter-revolution 1989, we lost almost everything. We don't have anything. We don't have any property because it was taken over by counter-revolution 1989, when it was actually made dictatorship, and there was completely change of local government in Montenegro. A Communist Party changed the name to Democratic Socialist Party. What is not democratic at all, what is not socialist, what they done, they privatize everything, they destroy everything what 3 generations, our grandparents and parents and my generation built in Yugoslavia, they destroy in 10 years. what he was building since in all 20th century, they completely destroyed. This means, what they done? They first they legally take all property. Property was the government. All factory was property of workers, and it wasn't actually property of government. They legally what they done? They legally just privatized all this property, and now there is no even workers anymore because they lost all factory. They privatized and they closed. This is what is happening. And the Communist Party at this moment is completely without any power. I'm from 13 member of Communist Party. I'm youngest member. That's why probably they chose me. Most of them are really old people, over 75, 80 years old. Young people, they don't know much about that. And it's very difficult for me and a little bit younger member to organize and prove them, show them what was actually Yugoslavia 25, 30 years ago. And many people don't know what actually, you know all this was happening in Sarajevo, Serbia, Bosnia, but you don't know how was economic status in former Yugoslavia. 1989, when
up, please?
When International Monetary Fund wanted to destroy Yugoslavia, they asked to close banks because bank wasn't even government. It was controlled by workers. You know, Žižek knows that very well. And
I definitely don't know that at any point banks were controlled by workers. I'm sorry, take Yugoslavia history.
You have to wind up.
All right, okay, sorry.
No, you have to stop.
And they wanted to dismantle central. All right. All right, this is what I wanted to say. There is big trouble. Montenegrin government, they want to join NATO. Only way to stop them is to take out this government and to make some kind of demonstration against joining NATO. And I mean, this is only way. What I just asking, what I will ask from British people to help us organize a referendum, what is not legally obliged by our government to be done. This is what I want to do.
Before Rachel speaks, I've got a couple more questions to read out. This is from Toros. Is there a possibility for Marxists and anarchists to work together in the aim of reaching a communist world, since their conceptualisation of communism is generally the same? And secondly, from Mark from LSE, is democracy the biggest obstacle to stopping irreversible climate change before it becomes irreversible? In 15 years, he says. Okay, the speaker after Rachel will be Paul Holbrook from Brixton.
Hi, I want to take issue with John Holloway, really, because I think listening to him, it seems to me that he underestimates what capitalism does to the human condition. Capitalism makes us alienated. Marx described a process where what is human becomes animal. And we can only feel ourselves when we are doing the animal. And it's through our labour, which is what actually creates us as something special, that gets taken away from us and completely perverts our lives. It means that we can't imagine all our capabilities because of the world that we live in. And that relationship doesn't just stop at work, so we don't get rid of alienation when we leave work. It carries all through our lives, which is partly why so many people feel that they can't think, that they feel that they can't dream. And it's through resistance that you do see, but partly you have to dream if you're a Marxist and want to imagine a better world. Part of keeping you going is thinking about different possibilities. But it's important to also realise that your dreams are based in the world that we live in. So if you just think about, I'm a healthcare worker, and as far as I can get when thinking about health work, is better hospitals. Because that's what I've known, that's what healthcare is. Nicer drugs, more research on drugs and better hospitals. But actually, in a whole change, a revolutionary change, everything gets up and played for grabs. And in that, all our ideas change. And what's exciting about within resistance is that dreams and dreamers are created. And those dreams, some have contingency, when you think about from the early Chartists and their sort of dreams about wanting land and wanting more. But one of the main things that people want is to be in the driving seat of their own lives. And I think that's what John Holloway doesn't see. If all we can have is a park or a series of parks, then we're not fundamentally changing. It's a funny thing, because it's like we need to dream, but we also need to realise that our alienation perverts our dreams. It's only in acting and changing the world that we can unpervert our dreams and really release our own imagination and dream the dreams we need to dream.
This is from Rifat. Does it not signify that the horizon of capitalism has not been transcended if communism is still defined within the framework of the terms of economic production? And secondly, from Oliver from Germany, don't we need socialism first and only then communism? After Paul will be Thomas Franke from the Czech Republic.
Comrades, these debates are fantastically important, because they are a real riposte to those who argue that Marxism is a dead dogma. It is not. It is a tool to try to explain the world. But I must say that both to Slavoj and to John, that my perception of the world differs radically from theirs. John mentions Navarino Park. Slavoj mentions the anti-capitalist overload. Now, I think it's very difficult to explain to Greek workers that there is an anti-capitalist overload in Greece when they're being asked to take a 20% cut in their wages. I think it is also, quite frankly, unbelievable to point to Navarino Park as a way of resisting the vicious attacks of the Greek government, and indeed followed by other European governments across the continent. And it seems to me, therefore, that where we in the Socialist Workers' Party differ from those other people on the platform is that we believe that our tradition looks at the democracy of workers in struggle. So that, of course, there is a perception in China that Foxconn is going to herald a more tolerant Chinese working class. But, comrades, I do not believe that for one moment. The Chinese ruling class is a vicious ruling class that will use any means possible in order to hold down the Chinese workers. And what Foxconn have done is to frighten the Chinese ruling class into trying to hide their weakness. And therefore, I believe that revolutionary Marxists say that the question of workers' struggle, and I don't agree with Slavoj, the question of workers' councils, of councils of trade unionists and neighbourhoods, they are not an imposition from revolutionary Marxists. They are an imposition from the experience of workers in struggle. What I believe we've heard tonight from those two is very interesting, very entertaining, but in no way points a way forward to change this rotten world.
More questions to read out. I'll just point out I've had this many questions, so we won't get through them all. The first question is from Richard from the CWU to Slavoj. We now have the new international philanthropists like Bill Gates throwing money at good causes. I wonder if you could say a few words about these good people, or neo-communists or neo-paternalists or whatever name you care to give them. And the other question is, please justify Slavoj's view about direct democracy, that it is an illusion, especially if you take into consideration the huge capabilities of computer networking. And after Thomas will be Judith Orr.
Comrade Žižek, I want to thank you for three things. I want to thank you for that you as an Eastern European, as an anti-Stalinist and a former dissident, have put Lenin back on the map. To get Lenin into the Financial Times, that's a wonderful feat. I want to thank you for coming to our demonstration in Prague against the missile defense shield the US wanted to establish in the Czech Republic. And as a third, I want to thank you for being frank in your last interview for The Guardian, where you admit to bluffs and because some people have taken all of your writing at face value and it has done some damage, I think. I'm also a bit baffled that you still hang on to Bill Gates and oil in Venezuela as being in contradiction to Marx. That's one of the first things I think that the value theory of labor actually only applies to products that are produced in perfect markets. Bill Gates and oil in Venezuela are very much about monopoly, and therefore the labor theory of value doesn't apply directly.
Did you read Marx? Did you read Marx? How can you say this if you claim that you read Marx? I mean, sorry. Just beat Marx.
I think in the same interview in The Guardian, you said that you are baffled by your popularity. I think what your popularity is about is an expression of the zeitgeist. When we follow what have been the icons of the left over the last years, then I think that has been quite development. That you are talking about the polarization of that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. You think that you talk about thinking globally, acting locally, but as part of humanity, not as part only of a local struggle. And you bring to the fore the immediacy, the importance of Lenin that looking at the actuality of revolution in the here and now, the cracks in the system, not as a locale in the center of Athens, but in the social relations. In Eastern Europe, we actually have the anti-capitalism of corruption, or corruptionist capitalism can solve this. Okay, and what we have in the Czech Republic, I think, is that we in a sense made the whole Czech Republic a garden, and especially the place where the United States wanted to put their missile base, because we showed them the door. We were able to defeat their plans.
Their questions or hold them. Judith will have to be the last speaker, so that I've got time to bring all three back. So thanks again for everything you contributed.
I think that when John Holloway asked, why is everybody queuing, and it really was incredible to see that queue, and incredible to see the size of all these meetings of Marxism. And I think it's what the speaker said is that we can all agree that we hate capitalism, can't we? I mean, it's clear to us all what is wrong with capitalism, what it's doing to ordinary people around the world, and maybe now more clear to more millions of people than really we've seen in some generations in terms of what's happened with the crisis. But of course what we're debating tonight is, what is the alternative, and then how are we going to get there, isn't it? Those are the things that we can disagree on, or debate, if you like, if we're all agreed that what's happening right now we don't like. And I mean, absolutely clearly, if we look at Eastern Europe, if we look at China, if we look at other countries that claim in some way to be an alternative to capitalism, they're not. They're another form of capitalism, aren't they? That's proved by what's happening to the Chinese workers who are fighting back. And who knows if some of them are being wound up. But to me, this is people who are exploited fighting back, even under the most repressive conditions. And I think so even in those countries that claim to be something different, there is a social force being created that can challenge those societies in the way they run. And that's the working class. And I think the thing is about the working class that is so unique is that the ruling class and the capitalists need it. Because how else do they create their surplus? How else is the wealth created if they don't have workers? And therefore, we have a force that is created within the belly of the beast that can actually challenge the system. I don't think we can just create lots of little bits of socialism until they don't notice that we've taken over the world. I think we have to create a force that can actually smash it and change it. class struggle. Struggle will happen whatever we decide in the room tonight. There will be struggles, whether here or China or everywhere around the world. Struggle will happen. It's a product of capitalism, of a minority exploiting majority. What isn't predestined is, of course, whether our side will win. And that's the difference, isn't it? What sort of political leadership will the movements have? Will the workers have? Will people who come behind? And that's actually what Marxism is all about. I think we do need political leadership of the real force that can change the world, and that is socialist politics, and the idea that actually we can smash the system and replace it with, as the old anti-capitalist slogan said, something nicer, something a lot nicer, something a lot different, where there really is true liberation for the whole of humanity.
Back in the same order they spoke. Just to let you know, they'll all be signing copies of their books if you want to buy them on the stall outside, just outside these stalls in the foyer. We do have to leave the room because there's a play in here straight after this meeting. So first of all, I'll bring back Alex.
Well, it's frustrating because there's so many different points that have come up, and I'm just going to deal with three questions. First of all, Dushko, I'm absolutely with you in demonstrating against NATO. I'm absolutely not with you when it comes to defending the old Stalinist regime before 1989. The worst, for people who are real communists like us, to quote a book by Negri and Deleuze, the biggest problem that communists like us have is the heritage of the Stalinist regimes, and we have to insist that it's absolutely what we're fighting for and the old regimes. That's one point. Secondly, Slavoj, you really, all this stuff about intellectual property and immaterial labour, honestly, it's a total dead end. Don't go near it. Honestly, I mean, stop. Bill Gates. At the minute, Apple has overtaken Microsoft in terms of stock market value. What does Apple sell? It doesn't sell software. It's crucially isn't to do with intellectual property. It sells things. It sells very nice things, computers and iPhones and things like that. It produces material goods that are made by those workers in Foxconn. All this stuff about immaterial labour, what Marx shows is that under capitalism, all labour is immaterial. And John is very good about this in his new book, Crack Capitalism, because all the work that we do is subject to the imperative logic of competition. That means that our work, our productivity is constantly being compared with the productivity of workers in other workplaces. We're subject, in other words, our concrete labour is transformed into the abstract labour, which is the source of the profits that drive the system. That's the critical thing about Marx's theory of value. And all this stuff about services and immaterial goods and immaterial labour is a total waste of time. And you should just get away from that stuff. Final point to do with what John said. The picture that you paint, John, is incredibly inspiring. But the problem is that logic, that remorseless logic of capitalist competition, the logic of abstract labour, constantly seeks to crush and to close those cracks. And the only way we can keep those cracks open and widen them is to establish a different social logic. And to do that, we need power. And the thing that I think I disagree with both of you about this. I don't think that power is reduced to what we could do when we could make a garden or form some better way of living, which people do all the time. And I don't think power, alternatively, is just a matter of the existing state. I think there's a third form of power that comes when people organise collectively to resist their exploitation. And out of that power, we can get a different way of running the world. And that's what will produce communism.
I'm sorry. I mean, there was such an, if not overload of anti-capitalism, at least overload of so at least I would like to limit myself at least to answer the two of you main point. First, as it was already noted, that metaphor of the garden, keep capital out. I would also say there is nothing new. Every capitalist system needs as its inherent component something like this. In traditional capitalism, capital stay out of the family, capital stay out of the church, and so on. A kind of a space outside. I think, so for me, okay, let me develop that. The problem is, okay, garden, everything nice, okay. Let's say there are drug dealers in that garden, there are women beaten and so on. What would you have done? Sorry to tell you, I would have called the police. No, I would have organized very brutal thugs to keep violent people out. I'm sorry to tell you. Or let me go a step further. We have not only a gardener, but a group of farmers putting together an efficient cooperative. Then, of course, the capitalist farmers don't just look and send us a telegram with best pieces. They organize a sabotage here and there to prove how a thing like this cannot function. What would you have done? I would have organized a counter-terror. I'm sorry to tell you. Then, when it's there, maybe they kill one of us, kill three of us, and so on. I'm sorry to tell you this. Like Chavez now, I have great problems with Chavez. But as it is clear now, I was convinced by statement by Lawrence Eagleburger and so on, that this lack of food temporary in Venezuela, again, I'm not totally defending Chavez. I'm referring to a very specific phenomenon of, it can be proven beyond reasonable doubt, that the lack of food in this state-run stores in Venezuela is not just the spontaneity of the market where out of self-interest merchants or distributors operate like this. It's part of an orchestrated nature of the United States connected with local saboteurs. What do you do here? I'm sorry to tell you, a limited amount of state terror is totally justified to me. You put police on them, you use secret police, you smash them, and so on. Otherwise, sorry, then step down from power. Because, you know, you use this wonderful poetic expression that you had all these gardens went wider, and then Morales, you used the nice term, brought this to a logical conclusion. What is the logical conclusion? All Bolivia didn't become a garden. But the logical conclusion was that the left took power, controls police, controls up to a point. I know of the tension, the army and so on, which is why, to refer to your example, the gardens, if I don't take the term garden in this isolated sense of where you go, but the gardens, let's call them liberated territories, are, I hope, much safer because of this. Because you can count on the police that instead of annoying you, it will maybe even protect you. So I absolutely agree with both of you that because nonetheless we all share something, that power is not just state power. What really matters is local self-organization, or rather productive self-organization, and so on and so on. I just have my doubts, and this is the problem of countries and so on. To what extent can this local self-organization model be universalized? I think that we simply have to confront the problem of power. This is one thing. The second thing, very quickly, as to this Marxist, because they call it counter-attack, Greek makes cynical my idea of overload. No, I was talking about propaganda in the wealthiest Western countries where, my God, listen, look at Hollywood. It's almost difficult to find a movie having anything to do with business which doesn't in a ridiculous way portray a bad egotist capitalist, and there are no limits here. Remember the stupid second John Grisham movie, Pelican Brief, where even the evil capitalist is connected with the President of the United States. My problem is not, oh, you see, we are only in anti-capitalism. No. My problem is why even such ideological topics, which appear very radical, really threaten no one, only make the system more efficient. That was my point of anti-capitalist overload. exploitation, all that complex, and so on and so on. Sorry, but I definitely think that today it's much... First, let me say something. It's so easy, you know, to play the old card. No, the working class will arise against exploiters. But I take very seriously communism. And this is why, for me, really, as you both emphasize, it should be a real movement. Not, as my good friend Badiou is saying, an idea of communism, which then, as he concedes, from time to time it explodes, like under Spartacus, Rosa Luxemburg, and so on. That's not enough. What interests me, to put it in very naive terms, is where today do we see, if not already, elements of communism, at least to be very brutal, but in the authentic Marxist sense. Where do we see contradictions, antagonisms? This is for me the only real question, my God, for which it is clear that even in the long term, it will not be possible for, no matter how reformed, democratic, multicultural, tolerant, liberal democratic capitalism will not be able to, not resolve, but even keep in check these antagonisms. And in a very modest way, I try precisely, because I'm also like you, guided by the problem, let's not dream about abstract communism. Where do we see traces today? I claim ecology, I claim intellectual property, I claim biogenetics, maybe the list is, I claim, of course, and this is for me crucial. Here, for example, I claim we should make a step further from Marx. Let's be very clear. For Marx, the ideal, radical, pure form of capitalism was one in which legal equality, we are all citizens. I know you want to stop the voice truth and so on. Because there was but the whole point of Marx is that legal equality, we are all free citizens, is the very form of how in the civil society, as legal free subject, we assume being exploited and so on and so on. What I claim, it's a very commonsensical claim empirically, in the best British empiricism sense, is that obviously today's capitalism, this is for me the big meaning of things like, which I agree with you in a mystified way, are described by Agamben as Homo sacer and all that, is that capitalism, in order to function, no longer can even afford this universal equality. It is receding from it. You have immigrants, you have les sans-papiers, you know what I mean? It has to create new and new de facto excluded second-class citizens and so on and so on. That's again another, I thought I'm very practical here. Isn't this another side where we can start the struggle? As to Apple, you know, I don't agree respectfully with your example. Yes, I know. Apple is selling products. Microsoft also, you buy a disk and so on. But I claim, and it was proven, that again, the price of iPad is for me intellectual labor in what precise sense? In the sense that in the price of iPad, $400 and so on, the part of material production of it is practically negligible. It's not that, you know, Steve Jobs puts together the production cost and they say, let's screw it with extra exploitation when we arrive at the price. It's a totally different logic. But again, what makes me a little bit depressed, and I will get boost from this, not applaud, I want to be finished as the Jesus Christ is that it depresses me a little bit, you know, this rhetoric of no dear revisionist, intellectual labor, blah, blah, nothing, working class, and so on. I don't see, I think, no, this is bad news, but no matter how long you will wait, you will not get a moment when this authentic working class, the way we knew it, will reappear, and so on and so on. I claim that working class, where do they see the definition of working class? If there is an absolute human tragedy today, and typically those who speak all the time about human rights never mention it, is today's Congo. You cannot say this is working class. You know, all this excluded, exploited in different ways. The problem is to bring all of them together. I stop.
Our problem is surely we all live in a society dominated by a suicidal dynamic. The dynamic which Marx analysed in the law of value, the dynamic which structures production according to faster, produce things that will sell, produce them as fast as possible, as quickly as possible. We know that we produce and reproduce this dynamic every time we produce value. We know that we do produce this dynamic every time we perform abstract or alienated labour. The question is, how can we break that dynamic? Because if we don't break it, then it is very likely that we will destroy humanity in a reasonably short time. Destroy humanity completely. Okay. How can we break that dynamic? It seems to me that we cannot break that dynamic by calling Tories scum. Doesn't help. We know that they're scum. We know that our politicians are scum. Why waste our time saying it? We cannot do it either calling for socialist policies, because anything that a state does, states are forms of organisation so integrated into the reproduction of capital that they cannot break that dynamic. And if you look at what's happening in Bolivia, Bolivia is not trying to break that dynamic. What is happening in Bolivia, what is happening in Venezuela is very exciting indeed. But the dynamic of capitalist production is being reproduced in both places. We cannot break that dynamic by thinking we are going to create communism in 50 years' time. Because we may not be around in 50 years' time. It is ridiculous. It is absurd. I'm sorry, Alex, your example of the museum was lovely. But it's really absurd to think of communism as a post-capitalist society someday. We cannot wait. How do we break the dynamic? The only way we can break the dynamic is by refusing and by doing things in a different way, by producing in a different way, by creating other social relations. And if we think of that, then we can see that there are millions and millions of examples in the world of people dedicating their lives to doing just that. And sometimes these examples are pathetic. And sometimes these examples are so small that we can think we can just laugh at them. And sometimes we think of them as a tiny garden. But if you look at what's happened in Cuba, for example, there's been an explosion of tiny gardens by the people themselves, so that they now produce 60% of the food required for Havana within the city itself. And Alex says we need, if we want to build these tracks, if we want to expand these tracks, we need power. Yes, but we don't need their power, we need our power, we need our coming together. We need to do things in a different way, and if we create a community garden, of course we'll have problems, because drug addicts go in, because drug pushers go in, because of course people will beat women. And do we call the police then? Like hell we do. What do we do? We don't call the police, because if the Greek police are like the Greek police are supposed to be, if the Greek police are like the Mexican police, then they will abuse those women systematically. They will not solve the problem. If we call it a power that is alien to us, then we are reproducing their power. What we need, of course, is forms of community control over behaviour in the garden. Not our own police, but certainly our own forms of vigilance, our own forms of control of behaviour. And that is exactly what the gardens, or the garden is doing in Greece and many other community gardens. Okay, so we need power, but we need our own power, not a power that we can take from real movement, communism. And that's what we have all said, the three of us, is communism is the real movement of anti-capitalist struggle. But that real movement of anti-capitalist struggle, where do we find it? Where do we find the antagonism? We don't have to look to intellectual property or to China or to Greece or to Mexico or to Venezuela. The antagonism of capitalism is part of our everyday lives, and the struggle against capital is part of our everyday lives, and not only of people who come to Marxism in 2010, but it is part of the everyday life of all of us who live in capitalism, and that is why communism is a real possibility. It is a real possibility because it's a real actuality, and that's where we have to start from.